Yesterday, I scanned and I sent out when we learn Shkolim, which we'll make a siyum on Yad Hashem this Sunday, we use something called the Mishnah Behira. Most of you bought a Mishnah Behira, a Maseches Shkolim. I don't know if we read the Mishnayos, sometimes we read the Rav. There were different charts and pictures. I believe it was helpful. I didn't get any feedback either way if it was helpful or not. The Mishnah Behira also has a volume on Sheviis, on Shemitah, which is in Hebrew. It's a regular Mishnayos. It has pictures and charts as well. This is one option. The other option is, as I mentioned, the Kahati Mishnayos. They have the Kahati Maseches Sheviis with the Mishnah in Hebrew, the Kahati explanation in English. And I'm trying to get a copy of that from Binyamin. Hopefully I'll get he's tried, hopefully we get a copy in the next few days. And then people will be able to make a choice which one that they would like to use. We'll see how the schedule allows the Mishnayos to fit in. So yesterday I scanned from the Mishnah Behira, the introduction to Maseches Sheviis. And that's what we'll look at today in this time slot, which is really for Shkolim, but we're not going to learn Shkolim today. We have one Mishnah left in Shkolim. Be'ezrat Hashem will make a siyum on Sunday. Let's learn the introduction to the laws of Shemitah as written in the Mishnah Behira. You should have that in the scan. The first page are the psukim about Shemitah. There are basically three places in the Torah where Shemitah is discussed. Now, before we go any further, when a person learns an introduction to a subject that he's really not familiar with at all, the introduction results in hundreds of questions. Well, how does this work? How does this work? How does this work? And you can't answer these questions because then you would have to learn the whole Masechta. This is just an introduction. We're going to hear some phrases, some words that we may be familiar with, that we've heard over time during Shemitah or in connection with Shemitah. And if I say the word Oitzer Beis Din, people are going to say, oh yeah, but how does it work? That's not the purpose of this introduction. To learn Oitzer Beis Din, we need a lot of time to learn Oitzer Beis Din. The purpose of the introduction is everybody stay calm. We're going to introduce just basic concepts. And then, in Yad Hashem, we'll learn Maseches Sheviis. These concepts will be developed more fully. But right now, let's just get words, phrases. What do the terms of art mean? Okay. Shemitah is discussed basically in three places in the Torah. First in Parshas Mishpatim, which is the first psukim you have at the top of the first page of your handout. And that's in very, very summary form. The Torah says, V'sheish shonim tizres artzecha v'asaftes v'asa. 6 years you can plant your field and gather the growth, gather the grain. 6 years you can plant and you can collect the grain that grows. In other words, for 6 years, you can do whatever you want in your field. V'hasheviis, and in the 7th year, tishmetena unatashta. We're not going to go into the literal translation here. Tishmetena unatashta means leave it alone. Just leave the land alone. Now, what do you do then? V'achlu evyonei amecha. Poor people, and it doesn't have to be poor people. It means anybody. Your field is hefker. People can walk into your field and eat from the trees and eat from whatever's growing in your field. You're not the boss anymore in the 7th year. V'yisram, and what's left over, tochal chayes hasad. The animals of the field can eat what's left over. Kein tase lecha mechol. And so shall you do not only to grain, you shall do it to your vineyard, and you shall do it to your olive trees. Very summary. We don't know much about Shemitah. Those are the two first psukim in the whole Torah, in Parshas Mishpatim, in Shemois, Parshas Mishpatim. The general idea of Shemitah. Do whatever you want for 6 years in your field. In the 7th year, leave the field alone. Anyone can come in and eat from what's growing. The leftovers can be eaten by the animals of the field. And you shall do this not just to grain, you shall do it to the vineyard, and you shall do it to the olive tree. End of the summary. Now we go to the end of Chumash Vayikra, Parshas Bahar, and we get great details. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe bar Sinai lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'amart aleim. Hashem spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai and said to him and told him to tell the Jewish people, Ki salvo el haaretz asher ani nosim lachem, v'shovsa haaretz Shabbos lashem. When you come to Eretz Yisrael, the people should allow the land to have Shabbos. The 7th year is Shabbos for the land. 6 shanim tizra sadecha. 6 years you can plant your field. V'sheish shanim tizmor karmecha. And for 6 years you can prune your vineyard. Vasaftes tuvasa. And you can gather in everything that grows. It's yours for 6 years. Uvashana hashvius, in the 7th year, Shabbos Shabboson yeh la'aretz. Shabbos Shabboson, that double Shabbos. Like Yom Kippur, Shabbos Shabboson, it's a double Shabbos. Yeh la'aretz, Shabbos Lashem. So we have the word Shabbos 3 times in this pasuk. In Parshas Mishpatim, of the psukim, the first psukim we learned, the Rebbeinu Shalom just said 6 years do what you want, and the 7th year leave the field alone. It didn't use the word Shabbos. In Parshas Bahar, the Torah now teaches us that the 7th year, like the 7th day, is Shabbos. It's Shabbos for the human being. The 7th year is Shabbos for the land. And it uses Shabbos 3 times. Shabbos, Shabboson, yeh la'aretz, Shabbos Lashem. Not only is it a Shabbos for the land, it's a Shabbos Lashem. Now here we're going to get the biblical prohibitions as to what you can't do. And this is going to occupy a good portion of Maseches Sheviis. What is biblically prohibited to do in a field? What is rabbinically prohibited to do in a field? Here we're going to read about what's biblically prohibited to do in a field. People have a lot of misconceptions about what you can and cannot do in your gardens or in a field. People during Sheviis say, I can't water my garden, my plants are going to die, my trees are going to die, I can't prune my trees, the tree is going to overgrow, it's going to get sick, it's not true. So if we're calm, we're going to learn about Sheviis, but first we need to know what biblically can't be done during Sheviis. And biblically, there are 6 things that can't be done. 4 of them are directly written in the Torah, and 2 of them are basically, we learn out midin. We'll see that. Bashana Sheviis, in the 7th year, Shabbos Shabboson yeh la'aretz, Shabbos Lashem. 1, Sodcha lo Sizra, biblical prohibition. Do not plant the field. Planting is biblically prohibited. If a person is found seeding his field during Sheviis, and there are 2 witnesses who warn him and tell him, stop, it's Sheviis, you may not do that, and he continues to plant the field, seed the field, Beis Din will give him 39 lashes. It's a lav doraisa. 1. Karmecha lo sisma, you are not to prune your vineyard. That's malacha doraisa 2. Zuriya 1, Zamira 2. Eisafriach ketzircha loy siktar. The svichim, this whole word svichim, is probably the most complex issue in all of Hilchos Shemitah. We're not going to go into exactly svichim now. We don't have the time. This is not the shiur to go into svichim. That's a whole category of work you can work on for weeks, what svichim are. But the Torah says, Sviach ketzircha lo siktar. The things that grow in the field, do not cut. So this is the 3rd malacha, Ketzira, cutting. Ves inzvei nizirecha lo sivtza, and the grapes that grow in your vineyard, do not cut them down. So look at the pasuk. How many malachas doraisa are there? Sodcha lo sizra, don't see. Karmecha lo sizmar, you cannot prune the vineyard. Svia ketzircha lo siktzar, you can't cut that which grows in the field. Ves inve nizirecha lo sivtza, don't cut off the grapes. So we have ketzira, zamira, we have zaria, zamira, ketzira, and betzira. Shana Shabbos and Liya Aretz. It's a year of Shabbos. V'hoisa Shabbos Aretz lechem la'achla. The resting year for the land will be so that you can eat from it. Meaning, if I own a field, I'm allowed to take fruits from my field. What grows in my field during Shemitah, I'm allowed to take from it also. I'm also allowed to eat. There's no prohibition on the owner of a field not being allowed to touch his fruits or his grain. Only other people can take it. Now, there's an issue of how things are growing. So if you're talking about grains, the question is, grains don't grow unless you plant it. And that which you planted, you already cut last year. That's where this question of svichim come into. We're not going to discuss that. But apples, pears, oranges, dates, grapes, these things, they're growing in my field. I also want to eat some grapes. I'm allowed to take grapes from my own field to eat. What I can't do is start taking out boxes and packing up grapes and bringing it into my house and storing it. How much can I take? How much can I store for tomorrow and for next week? I have a family, a kindle, they like grapes. I also am entitled to the grapes. You're allowed to take grapes into your house. How much? We'll learn out in the Maseches Sheviis. But this idea that the owner can't touch anything in his field and only other people can take it is not true. I'm also allowed to eat from my field. I'm going to learn a lot of things in Sheviis. They're going to break a lot of ideas that we have about Sheviis. It can be for you to eat. You can eat it. You, your servant and your maid, people that work for you, toshavim, gerei toshav, Gentiles who have done that toshav type of conversion, they can eat from it too. Animals can eat from it. You can feed your animals. I have animals that I need to feed. Can I use the payers of Shemitah to feed them? What about a Masechta? The pasuk says yes. When and how? We'll learn in the Masechta. Tia called Okay. Those are the psukim. There's one other facet that's not discussed right here on this page, and that's psukim in Pashas Re'eh. In the Vorim in Re'eh, the Torah talks about Shmitas Ksafim, and that's a discussion in Maseches Sheviis all the way at the end. The last, at Shkia, the end of Shemitah, Shemitah goes from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Shkia, Rosh Hashanah. So, Mi'at Hashem, next year is Shemitah. Mashiach will be here to help us with all these halachas. Shemitah will be here, Tafshin Pei Beis. Rosh Hashanah, Tafshin Pei Beis. Boom, Shemitah. Rosh Hashanah, Tafshin Pei Gimel is Motzoi Sheviis. Leil Rosh Hashanah, Tafshin Pei Gimel. We're in Tafshin Pei Aleph. Next Rosh Hashanah, Bolino Tov, Tafshin Pei Beis. That whole year is Shemitah. The following Rosh Hashanah, Tafshin Pei Gimel. Shkia, Rosh Hashanah, Tafshin Pei Gimel. Anyone that owes you money, Shemitah is Meshamet. You can't collect money that you borrowed during the previous, money that you loaned during the previous 7 years. Again, we're not going to go into all the halachas. That's in the last parak of Sheviis. But that's another facet of Shemitah. Shemitah's ksafim. Shkia of Rosh Hashanah that will end Shemitah if you didn't write a prusbul or take some other action, remember that prusbul. Everybody is writing prusbuls on Erev Rosh Hashanah, the last day of the Shemitah year, to protect your ability to collect money that you loaned out during the previous 7 years. And that's a different sugya called Shemitah's Ksafim, dealt with in the last parak. So there are 3 basic places where Shemitah is discussed. Summary in Pashas Mishpatim and Shmos, which we just read. In detail in Pashas Bahar and Vayikra. And in Re'ein Devarim, the idea of Shemitah's Ksafim, money also is subject to being canceled, debts, at the end of the Shemitah year. Now we go to the next page of the handout. Zman HaMitzvah. When is the time that you keep Shemitah? Le'in Sheviis haaretz. Now there are 2 rules here. The timing of Shemitah breaks down into 2 sets of rules. When does Shemitah start and when does Shemitah end in terms of I have to stop working the field and when can I restart working the field? That's one issue. Then there's the issue of the payros of Sheviis, that which grew during Sheviis, olives, apples, pomegranates, they grew during Sheviis. They are holy and they have to be eaten in a certain way. If I go into my field or I go into someone else's field and I pick some pomegranates, I have to make sure I use those pomegranates properly. I don't want those pomegranates to go bad. I don't want to have to throw them away. There's Kedusha Sheviis there. And if I have to throw them away, there's a special way to throw them away. You don't just trash them in the garbage. So now the payros have Kedusha. When do the payros have Kedusha? There are fruits that began growing at the end of this year, at the end of the 6th year, and that fully ripen in the 7th year. Are those fruits Sheviis fruits? We can call it maybe blossomed in the 6th year, but weren't ripe until the 7th year, and now I picked them in the 7th year. Are those considered fruits of the 6th year, and they're not holy fruit, and I can do with it as I please? Or it's a 7th year fruit, and therefore it's Shemitah, holy fruit. The same thing can happen the other way. Fruit blossomed in the 7th year, and they ripened in the 8th year. Is that Sheviis holy fruit, or is that 8th year not holy fruit, regular fruit, and I can do whatever I want? So when does Shemitah start and when does it end results in 2 issues. When does Shemitah begin and end so that I have to stop working the field and then I can start working the field? That's the question of working the field. And then there's the question of Kedusha's payros. When does Shemitah begin and end in terms of what's growing on the tree? There are things that grow on the tree that it grows on the tree in the 7th year, but it's not considered Shemitah. And the things that grow in the 7th year that I pick in the 8th year that also may not be Shemitah, or may yes be Shemitah. So the beginning and end of Shemitah is a question of working the field and is also a question on the payros. So first question. Le'inyan Sheviis haaretz. Shnas hashmita noheges me Rosh Hashanah ad Rosh Hashanah. Shemitah goes from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Halacha l'Moshe Misi. That's biblical. That's pure biblical. But halacha l'Moshe Misinai, we have from the oral transmission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe at Sinai, lesser avodas hadama shloishim yom lefnei Rosh Hashanah b'zman shamikdash kai. During the days that the Beis Hamikdash stood, sheyibona b'mhev yameinu mamash hayoyim amen. We have a Kabbalah mi Moshe mi Sinai that during that time of the Beis Hamikdash, there are certain types of work that can't be done 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. Tosfos Sheviis, the same thing that there's something called Tosfos Shabbos. We don't wait to a second before Shkia to stop doing malacha. There's a din of Tosfos Shabbos, 15 minutes, 18 minutes, 42 minutes, a din of Tosfos Shabbos. You don't light candles at Shkia. We add to Kedusha Shabbos. The same thing is true for Shemitah. And this Tois Shemitah, Tois Sheviis, we get as halacha l'Moshe Sinai, 30 days, which means basically Rosh Chodesh Elul. This year, Beis Hamikdash is going to be built today. This year, Rosh Chodesh Elul triggers certain Hilcha Shemitah about what you can and cannot do already in the field, even though it's 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. That's only when the Beis Hamikdash is here. Chachamim hirchivu esman tosa shvius l'gabi meleches chavisha. There's a rabbinic rule that in the time the Beis Hamikdash stood, you have to stop plowing your field even earlier than the 30 days. And that's one of the discussions in Maseches Sheviis. There's the toast, there's Sheviis, biblical, pure biblical, Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. There's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There are certain things we don't do 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. Midrabanan, rabbinically, they forbade certain things to do even before 30 days, going all the way back to Pesach time or Shavuos time. That's purely rabbinic. And this halacha l'Moshe Sinai of 30 days before, or the rabbinic rule of even earlier, are only when the Beis Hamikdash stood. B'zman hazeh, Shemitah is Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Mishachorev Hamikdash bottled in Tois v'Sheviis me'atem midabanan. From the time of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, there's no longer any din of Tois v'Sheviis midoraisa, halacha l'Moshe Sinai of 30 days, or rabbinically. So B'zman hazeh, Mashiach Mamish Beis Hamikdash is coming in next second. Rebbeinu Shalom, please save us already. But Hashem, if it doesn't happen, Shemitah is Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. That's the first start-stop time. Working the ground. Working the ground is Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah Shemitah. What do we do about the fruits that grow? They started growing in the 6th year, they got picked in the 7th year. They grew in the 7th year, they got picked in the 8th year. How do I know if it's Shemitah or not? What's the beginning time and the end time? With respect to things that grow during Shemitah and the year before or after Shemitah, it's growing in the year 6 and 7, or it's growing in the year 7 and 8. There are stages that will be discussed in Maseches Sheviis. There are stages in the growth of these plants, grains, fruits, and different things. Beans are going to have a different rule than fruits, and those will have a different rule than grain. Chazal set up a set of rules. If this amount of a bean stalk grew, it is considered 6th year. If it didn't grow to that extent and it hit that point in the 7th year, it's 7-year beans. If grain hit this point in the 6th year, it's 6-year grains. If it doesn't hit that point to the 7th year, it's 7-year grain. If grain is growing in the 7th year, however it grows, or olives are growing on the olive tree, they came out at a certain point in the 7th year and they reached a certain stage, they are 7th-year olives. If they don't reach that stage to the 8th year, they're 8th-year olives. So the Mishnah is going to discuss different things and what stages it needs to reach so that we know, is it 6th year, 7th year, or 8th year? Hakovei eshnas hishtaychusa shel shemach zeh. Im shlav gidul zeh chol b'shnas hashmita. If the trigger point for the bean, the trigger point for the fruit, or the trigger point for the grain occurred in the 7th year of Shemitah, Hatzemach Kodesh B'Kedusha Sheviis V'Nisha B'Kedusha L'Olam. If the trigger point happened during the 7th year, you're dealing with fruit of Sheviis, grain of Sheviis, or beans of Sheviis, and they must be taken care of in Kedusha. Sheviis is ha'aretz. Now, what are the rules of what you can do to the land? We said that we just broke down Shemitah, the time and the end, to 2 questions. When do you start and when do you stop work in the field? How do you know what the beginning time and the end time is for what grows there? And now we're going back to the first question. Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, you can't do certain things in the field. What can't you do from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah? So we just read the pasuk. And the pasuk told us 4 things biblically. So now he explains. HaTorah asra sheish malachas hador b'Shvius. The Torah tells us you can't do 6 things during Sheviis. Now the pasuk only said 4. That's what we mentioned. There'll be 2 additional ones. Zuriya, planting, seeding. We read that in the pasuk. Ketzira, cutting. Just read that in the pasuk. Betzira, pruning. We just read that in the pasuk. Uzamira, and cutting to collect your grapes. Hamufurashos b'pasuk. Those are the 4 that are explicitly stated in the pasuk, and those are biblically prohibited to do during Shemitah. Now, of course, if a person wants to go into his field, his own field, and he wants to collect grapes in the amount that's permitted for him to collect for himself and his family, he's allowed to go and cut the grapes. What we're talking about here is the biblical prohibition of going into your vineyard and cutting the vines or cutting the grapes and cutting them off so that there's such a vast amount that you're storing that it's no longer useful for you and your family. In other words, the only way you would cut that much is to sell, which you're not allowed to do. And if you cut too much, they're going to go bad in your house. So you're not allowed to do that either. So those are the 4 that we read in the pasuk. V'chein charisha unatia hanilmodes min hadin. Plowing a field was not mentioned explicitly in the pasuk. Natia, planting. This means a tree. The Torah said zuriya. Zuriya means seeding. Seeding means for vegetables. It doesn't mean trees, large trees. That the word, Hebrew word, is natia. So the pasuk says 4 things that are biblically prohibited, and the Gemara learns out that there are 2 additional biblical prohibitions: plowing the field, not mentioned explicitly in the pasuk, unatia, and planting trees, also not explicitly mentioned in the pasuk. Hanol modas min hadin, we learn it out from the pasuk. Ve'ein loken alei. The first 4 that are explicitly mentioned in the Torah, if a person does that and is warned not to do it, and there are 2 witnesses, he will get malchus, 39 lashes. The last 2, he plows the field, or he plants a tree. Planting a tree, plowing a field are not expressly stated in the Torah. We learn it out of a pasuk, and therefore for those last 2 things, although it's biblically prohibited, a person would not get 39 lashes for doing it because it's not explicitly stated in the pasuk. Amnam, however, mutter liktzor v'livtzor ma'at l'tzorchei beisa. It is permitted to cut things that are growing in your field, or to cut grapes a little at a time for your own home. You're also allowed to eat, so you're allowed to cut what you need for your family. Uladas haramban tzorch l'shanos miderech haktzira gila. The Ramban Shita is like on Shabbos when you have to do something that for whatever reason you're not allowed to touch muktzah, but there's some reason that's a heter to do it. So sometimes we're told to do it with a shinui, do it differently. So the Ramban says when a person's going out to his field to collect some grapes or to cut something because he's going to use it for his family, he should do it with a shinui so that people who are watching him do it, they understand that because he's doing it with a tool that's not the normal tool to cut, or he's collecting it in something that's not the normal vessel to collect it in, he's doing it because he's doing it for his family. That was the signal. One of the things that we're going to learn about Be'ezrat Hashem in Maseches Sheviis is Chazal were very concerned through the Masechta about Maris Ayin, what people will think you're doing. Remember, fields are basically open places. Today, our gardens have fences around them, which is also, if you have fruits, vegetables growing in your garden and your garden is completely fenced in and locked up, there are certain issues with such a garden during Sheviis. You may have to put up signs. There are all kinds of halachas. You have to put up signs that your field is hefker and people can knock on your door and go in. But having your field, having your garden that has fruits or vegetables in it completely locked up and no one can get in there during Shemitah presents a halachic problem, which we'll deal with in the Masechta. But when you're dealing with a wide open field, nobody's putting, people have acres, dunams of fields. You're not putting a fence around your field. You can't do it. So everybody basically in an agricultural society sees what everybody else is doing in their field. Chazal were very, very sensitive to maris ayin. People are doing permitted things in their field, but if you just look at it, it looks like maybe something is being done that's improper. So therefore, Chazal instituted many rules that if you're going to do something which is really permitted in your field, you're going to do it this way and not the regular way. So here the Ramban puts a rule down that if you're going to cut grapes or cut fruit in your garden for your own consumption, which is mutter during Shemitah, you do it with a shinui, so that people can see that you're not doing it to sell. If you're doing it to sell, you would do it in great quantity. In great quantity, you would have your normal tools and you'd have your normal vessels. And here the person has, he goes into the field and he has tiny little scissors and he has a cup, a coffee cup, and he's putting grapes in his coffee cup. What's he putting grapes in his coffee cup for? What are you going to do with a coffee cup of grapes? You can't sell a coffee cup of grapes. He's doing it because he wants to personally eat grapes or because Yankala wants to eat grapes. It's Beseder. So the Ramban wants you to do it with a shima. The point here is that which grows in your field and in your garden, if you want to eat it or someone in your family wants to eat it, you are allowed to eat it. You just can't cut it in such a quantity that it would appear that it looks like you're going to sell it, or in such a quantity that it's going to go bad in your house. Chachamim hosifu v'asu sham malachas hadama k'shenasas lahavacha. Chachamim prohibited additional work. What about, we haven't talked anything here about watering. We saw the 4 things that the pasuk says you can't do. We have learned out from the Torah the 2 additional things, plowing and planting trees. We didn't talk about watering. Chachamim added certain prohibitions. Now, the Torah itself and the 2 additional biblical prohibitions of plowing and planting a tree have nothing to do with watering. The Rebbeinu Shalom did not say that Shemitah is a year where everyone's garden, everyone's field needs to die. That's not what the Rebbeinu Shalom said. Now, of course, there's rain, but there are plants, garden plants, vegetables that do need water even before and after the rainy season. So the idea that Shemitah is the year where your garden is going to die is wrong. There is no biblical prohibition at all about watering. We spoke earlier in the Shir today in Yeshaya, God created things. God doesn't want anything to be destroyed. He didn't create Shemitah so that all of Eretz Yisrael can go fallow, dry, and people die of starvation, chas v'shalom. So the Chachamim added certain prohibitions, which for now, without getting complicated, we'll use as an example, watering. You're allowed to water your field. You're allowed to water your garden. If you're watering your garden through a computer system that goes on and off, so a frum gardener that knows the halachas of Sheviis, he will readjust your clock for Sheviis so that it'll water a little less during Sheviis. He'll get the clock down to the amount of water necessary to keep the garden alive. Chachamim hosifu va'asu sha'ar malachas ha'adama shenasu lavacha. Chazal added a prohibition and said you can't do anything in your field or garden that will make it better. We cannot improve things during Shemitah. There's no prohibition on making sure that fruits and trees are sustained, that they remain healthy and alive. You want to make the tree better, bigger, prettier, different shayla. But the basic necessities of a tree, of fruits, of a garden can be maintained during Sheviis. And for that reason, people that have gardens and vegetables and fruits either need to know Hilchos Shemitah or you need to have a gardener who's familiar with Hilchos Shemitah, because the things do not have to die. God doesn't want them to die. It's a whole different purpose to Shemitah. as we just mentioned. There are other things that Chazal said don't do in your field simply because Maris Ayin. People will see that you're in your field, you're digging, for example. It's going to be a whole set of halachas about a person wants to dig a hole in his field. Why does he want to dig a hole in his field? He needs the dirt for his house. In those days, there were dirt floors in your house. He has a pit that's in his house. He wants to fill the pit in his house with some dirt. He goes into the field, digs up some dirt, brings it into his house. Somebody looking at that says, oh, Reuven is digging his field. He must be getting ready to plant. So we have all kinds of halachas about digging your field. Even you have no intention to plant anything there, you just want the dirt. Or you want to move rocks from your field. You don't want people to trip. You just want to remove some rocks. Oh, Reuven's looking, he says, he's getting rocks out of his field. He's getting ready to plow. Chazal have a lot of rules of what you really can do. You can remove rocks. But what the Chazal set up rules of how these things can be done and if they can be done simply because of Maris Ayin. It looks like he is getting ready to work the land, and therefore Chazal prohibited these things because of Maris Ayin. Okay, we'll continue Me'at Hashem. Next time we learn Mishnayos, either Sunday when we make the Siyum on Shkolim, or after we'll continue with this Hakdam. You can see in footnote 3, there's already a discussion of this thing called Otzer Bezdin. Many people buy wines. That's a popular thing. Today they even have fruits and vegetables that are quote unquote Otzer Bezdin. But wines, you a lot of time have stamped on it post Shemitah year. It'll say Otzer Bezdin, Rav Reuben Otzer Bezdin, other people's Otzer Bezdin. What is this Otzer Bezdin? Can you rely on this Otzer Bezdin? Can you rely on some Otzer Bezdins and not others? So we already see in footnote 3 that famous phrase, it's Otzer Bezdin, it's okay. All these are ideas that we'll be introduced to, phrases, terms of art, and then we'll be able to go further into this in Maseches Sheviis and see it through Maseches Sheviis. I would like to bring your attention Rav Rimon, a wonderful, wonderful posek, Yosef Tzvi Rimon. He's written a lot of halachas for him. And he does a wonderful job because not only does he print it beautifully, he prints it with beautiful pictures, and he prints it with beautiful charts. He's done this for Hilchos Shabbos, he's done it for Hilchos Pesach. Last Shemitah he did it for Hilchos Shemitah. It's in Hebrew, Shemitah. You can get it at Binyamin's Svarim store underneath the Merkaz. They're beautiful pictures, colorful charts. And now, introducing Hilchos Shemitah from Rav Rimon, translated into English. Same charts, colorful charts, colorful pictures, stories about Shemitah, with the halachas step by step, now translated into English. This is also available at Binyamin's store. If you're serious about learning Hilchos Shemitah, or if you're serious about wanting to know personally what you can do.
I have two ladies nagging me and not leaving me alone to breathe.
Excuse me?
Look, listen to your voice.
Okay, someone needs to mute. So this is available at Binyamin. Which Mishnayos we're going to use for Sheviis? It will either be the Mishnah Behira,
Yes, the mayor's not going to say.
or we will be using the Kahati. Either way, I strongly suggest that if you like it in Hebrew, to get Rav Rimon Hilchos Shemitah in Hebrew, or the translation to English. It is a wonderful guide, because if you live in Eretz Yisrael, you need to know what's going on during Shemitah, and what you can do in your house during Shemitah, and what you can buy during Shemitah, and if you buy it, what you need to do with Shemitah, and what are all the different Shitas. You're living in Eretz Yisrael. It's a small investment to understand what Shemitah is, and as we learn Shemitah, we're going to refer to Rav Rimon's Sefer to summarize different halachas so that we get the halacha l'maisa bisman hazeh in our modern day environment here in Eretz Yisrael. Okay.